Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Today Heidi creates this beautiful cathedral window throw pillow. We'll go through the math so that you know what sizes you'll need for your pillow. I'm also going to take you through supplies list at any time while you're watching this video. If you like what you see, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. You want to be sure to catch all the videos and all the fun projects that we're going to be making. So let's get started.
We need to determine the size of our squares that we need to cut. We have a pillow that has 2 windows across the top. Multiply that number by 2 and you get 4. I had already decided that I wanted a 17-inch square pillow. Now I need to divide that 17 inches by the 4 from the first equation. And now we know that our squares will be 4 1/4 inches. But we need to add to that 1/4 inch seam allowances. So add a 1/2 inch to the 4 1/4 inches and we now have 4 3/4 inches. Our squares need to be cut 4 3/4 inches. Now how many of those squares do we need? Well, each window has 12 squares. These pillows have 2 windows horizontally, 2 windows vertically. That's a total of 4 windows. So we have 4 windows that we need to multiply by the 12 squares that we need for each window. And 4 times 12 is 48. So we now know that we need 48 of the 4 3/4 inch squares cut from our main fabric. And because our 4 windows create a diamond in the center, we now have 5 windows. We need 5 4 3/4 inch squares cut from our accent fabric. Here are the items that we will be needing for this project: a cutting mat, ruler, rotary cutter, a solid quilter's cotton and accent fabric, cotton batting, scissors, pins, coordinating thread, and a sewing machine. Now, using the mat, the rotary cutter, and the ruler, I'm going to cut 48 squares out of the white muslin and 5 squares out of my accent fabric. Now here's a tip for when you have to cut several squares out of your fabric. And you want to do this, I haven't ironed this yet, but you want to do this with fabric that you have ironed out. I actually take my fabric, it comes, folded in half. I will fold it in half again. Now I have 4 layers and I will cut strips 4 3/4 inches, and then once I have those strips, I will then stack those strips to however many thicknesses I'm comfortable cutting, and you do that as well. You don't want to cut so thick that you can't keep precision in your squares. Now I have my 48 squares cut from the cotton muslin. And then I have my 5 of the accent fabric squares cut. Now to begin, what we need to do is take 3 squares, have one as our base panel. Then I'm going to take, put that up here. I'm going to take the other ones, I'm going to fold them in half diagonally to make a triangle, and I'm just going to finger press that. And then what I do then is lay this on top of my first square so that the diagonal fold runs diagonally across the square. I'm going to do the same thing with the other one. Fold it in half diagonally, finger press it, put the fold, butt it up against the previous one that I put on there, and one at a time I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch basting stitch all the way around to join these 3 pieces together. If you counted correctly, you should have used up all your squares. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to lay them out
4 at a time. What I'm doing is I'm taking the folds, arranging them so that it makes a diamond pattern. You can see the folds go around like this. You got the right sides up, you know, the pretty sides up. From now on, I'm just going to call that the right sides. This is the side you're going to see on the pillow. We are going to take those and one side over on top of the other and sew 1/4 of an inch down both of these, and then we'll come right back. Now, as you can see, I have my first seam sewn, and they are attached. I chain stitch these together, which really, if you're a quilter, you know what that means. If not, what that means is when I'm running this one through the machine, instead of lifting the foot and cutting the thread, I just butt this one right up against it and keep sewing. At this point, I will also finger press these seams open for my next stitch line. Again, right sides up. My fold lines are facing up. I'm going to take the bottom one, flip it up, and I'm going to stitch again 1/4 of an inch seam allowance right here, matching up my seams, making sure they're laying flat. I now have them sewn together. So as you can see, I have one completed square for my pillow top. And I did finger press this seam so that when I get ready to sew it all together, I got those open. I'm going to go do the rest of them, and by the time you're done, you should have 4 of these completed squares. We have all 4 of our squares completed now. And you should have, either with your fingers or with an iron, pressed open your seams. So what we're going to do now is we're going to assemble these 4 squares. We're going to fold it over, lay it on top, matching your seams and your edges. We're going to sew them together using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So I have my vertical seams sewn, and as you can see, I have my seams matched up. The points come together really nicely. We're going to flip the bottom up, and again we're going to sew along this seam line, matching up the seams with 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now I have all 4 blocks sewn together, and I have pressed the seam allowances open with my iron. And now it's time to put the accent fabric squares on. And wherever you see a diamond is where we're going to put a square. And what's nice about this is that these lines in the seam allowances actually give you the marks in which to line up your squares. So if your points are running along the seam allowances, you're centered. This is the part where I do use pins, because I'm going to be taking this to my sewing machine like this, and I don't want my my squares to move around on me. So what I do is I take a pin kind of towards the middle, and I put one vertically, and then I put another pin in, and I put it in horizontally. And that way it's just not gonna rotate or shift on me. We have everything pinned, and now this is the fun part, at least in my opinion, and that's the part where we create the panes around the windows. And how we're going to do that, we are going to take the folds of our triangles and bring them over the top of our accent fabric like this. When we sew, we're going to start from an outside edge, and we got this fold coming over the accent fabric all the way over that point, we want to make sure that all our raw edges get covered. We're going to start from this very end, and then we're going to make a very tightly sewn top stitch along this folded edge. I do mine about a 1/16 of an inch away from the folded edge. You don't have to do yours that small. An 1/8 of an inch would be fine as well. When you come to the end of your first one, be sure that you sew all the way along that edge until you get to this junction of seam allowances. You're going to put your needle down and you're going to pivot your work so that you can continue on around this edge. But this one's going to curl over the top of that one. And because you have your needle down, start your neck stitching on this side, following as closely as you can to the edge, keeping it nice and neat. Right now I don't have it pulled over far enough. This is a bias. This fold is on the bias of the fabric. What that means is it's got a lot of stretch to it, so I can actually give it a little bit more pull so that when I get over here, I'm absolutely certain that this edge is covering up my all raw edges. This junction of all these seam allowances, I'm going to put my needle down, pivot my work again, and continue on along that edge. Now when I get back here, that means I've now gone all the way around my square, and I'm going to sew again all the way to the outside. Our outside triangles also need to get pulled back and sewn open just as these do. Even though there's no accent fabric over here, they still need to get pulled back. I don't bother pinning at all when I'm doing this part. I adjust it as I need to. And we're just going to sew along that edge. Then we'll put this one down. Sew along that edge. At this junction, that's when we're going to go around our center window. After we get done with this part, I will actually show you how I went around this, so you never have to cut your thread. You can do it in one continuous seam. Start at the side. I go all the way around one square. So that brings me back to where I started. Then I come up here, go around the center, come down here, then back around this square, around, 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 and then around this square, and then around that perimeter, and then around this square. And then all I have to do is actually just finish until I get back to there. So this is the Warm and Natural cotton batting, and I am going to cut a piece to put on the pillow. And I've actually got this doubled up because I have one more pillow I'm going to do, and so I'm just going to cut them both at the same time. But I actually do just cut these right to size, and just laying it right on here, laying the pillow top right on top of it. I'm going to take my rotary cutter and then I'll just cut around. And I'm not even going to bother with using a ruler, just going around it. I'm just going to remove the batting from behind there real quick. I am going to square up this pillow. When you do the stitches, sometimes they do tend to pull in, or just for whatever reason they're not exactly even. I'm going with the shortest distance the shortest measurement of the pillow. You can see I barely took anything off, but and I'm also screwing up with the back here. I watch the lines just to make sure I'm square with the previous trimming. It's all nice and square. Edges are very straight. It's ready to be sewn together. This next step is actually completely optional, and that is to add the batting on the back of the pillow top and do the free motion quilting that you see are going around each of the windows. I decided to do this because I didn't like the fact that there was one single layer of fabric in between the windows. And being a pillow, I wanted it to have a little bit more substance. I'm going to show you the layering and how I put it together, and I'll show you a little bit of the stitching as well, just so you can see how that all works. So I'm going to just show you how I put the batting on here. And it's perfectly fine that it's not cut exactly the same size. Once I get the quilting all done, I'll actually trim that down. So I'm not going to be sewing in any of these areas, so I do go ahead and put a pin in each of the squares. And then I like to go around in the seams in the outside perimeter and pin it there. And because I do come down here to quilt, I'm just gonna, I will be having to move this pin later, and that's okay. But I'd rather have everything holding together. Before doing the free motion quilting, there's a few things that we need to do to set up the machine. First of all, I have attached my quilting foot, and how that's different from a presser foot is presser foot presses against the fabric and stays down on the fabric. The quilting foot here, it moves up and down with the motion of the needle, so that frees up the fabric for me to move it around. One other thing is the feed dogs, which are down here in the plate, they need to be dropped down. For this project, I am doing only one design in the free motion quilting, a stippling pattern, and basically what that is, it's a meandering line where the lines never cross or meet, and they're squiggly and meandering. You know, it's kind of like watching a drunken man walk on a sidewalk. He can't walk in a straight line, so our lines are not going to be straight. You do have to put the foot down, but again, as I said, it will move up and down with the motion of the needle. And then I have these quilters gloves. They have little rubberized tips, and I do use them sometimes and when I'm doing my free motion quilting. And in this case, it works out good for me just because I have to hold these flaps open while I do the quilting. So you want your stitching to be even, and so you really want to make sure that you're going fast enough that your stitches aren't going to be too far apart as you're moving around. And really you'll get a feel for it, but it's quite fun. If you like to draw, you'll certainly enjoy doing this. Alright, we have the quilting done on the pillow, and the next thing for us to do is to trim the batting down to the same size as the pillow panel itself. The next part is to cut the panel for the back of the pillow, and I'm actually using the accent color that I have in the front. Now this is a home decorator's fabric, and it has a larger fibers. It's a bit of a loose weave. It tends to fray a little bit more than just your standard quilting cotton. So my pillow square is actually 17.5 inches square, and I cut this 18 inches square just to give me a little bit of extra so that I don't have to worry about any fraying when it comes to this. I have my back panel right side facing up and my pillow panel, and I'm going to face that down onto the back. Right sides are facing one another. Just going to center this. You can use pins to pin this, or if you have Wonder clips, you can use them as well. And I'm going to pin or clip all the way around my pillow. And then when I get done with that, I'm going to take it to the machine. I'm going to sew it starting 6 inches from one corner. I'm going to go around all 4 sides. When I get to the 4th side though, I'm going to stop about 6 inches in, leaving an opening so that I can stuff the pillow. So I'm starting about 6 inches from the corner of my pillow, and I'm using the actual pillow top as the edge that I need to follow for my 1/4 inch seam allowance. You want to make sure you back tack at the beginning so that when you're stuffing the pillow, it's not coming apart. And when I get a 1/4 inch away from the end, put my needle down and I pivot and get ready to go down the other side. Using my scissors, I'm going to trim all the corners to get rid of some of that bulk. Just make sure you do not cut into your seam. Alright, so I've trimmed up the corners. Now it's time to turn the pillow right sides out. So I'm going to reach inside. I'm going to go to poke it into my hand on the inside there. And then just start bringing it out that hole. Being very careful not to pull or tug too much. You don't want to rip your seams out. And then you just want to take some time to push all the corners out so that you have nice points. Have nice points on them. And you can use like a chopstick or some other turning tool. You just want to be really careful not to poke right through your corners. That would not be good. You'd be fraying your fabric then. So I have my pillowcase all turned out and ready. It has the opening here for stuffing, and it's ready to get its filling. So I'm actually using some pillows that we already had here on the boat. They were clean. Just they were just getting pretty compact after quite a few years. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm just going to take the case off of them, and it's really easy to revitalize the stuffing. You know, all you have to do is I take it apart in little handfuls and then just pull it apart with my hands just to restore the fluff back to it. And so I'll just keep on doing that until I've totally refluffed all of it. But as I go, I'll just put each handful right into the new pillow. And I usually kind of start with the corners. I usually get the corners pretty well stuffed first and then kind of fill in between. I have the pillow all stuffed, and it's time to close up the opening that we left for putting the fiber fill in, or the polyfluff. So I'm just going to use some Wonder Clips to hold that closed while I hand stitch this. Now my knot's buried inside, and then I'm just going to stitch like that. So I'm over here on this blue side. Now I go over straight across it to the muslin side, travel a little ways, and then come back out at the top of the accent fabric. And again, just make my stitch start right across, catch a little bit of the other side, and pull. And this does a really nice hidden seam, or excuse me, hidden stitches. You don't see them at all. And so I'll continue doing that all the way across. Well, I've got the pillow all finished up. The opening is all closed up. One of the things that I did fail to mention in the supplies list was a pillow form. Now, depending on whether or not you have a pillow at home that you're wanting to recover, you will want to get yourself a pillow form or a bag of polyfill so that you can make your pillow. Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, give it a thumbs up and please subscribe. I can't wait to see you on our next project with Heidi Creates.